partnerships moving forward. So we went from, like locally, at the police department level, we had a street crimes unit that our mission was kind of from a street level to go after primarily drugs, gangs, career criminals, things like that. And the more we were into that, more we realized that pretty much everything that we were doing was centralized or revolving around drugs. So our focus became more and more toward that arena. And then we realized, okay, again, we're shorthanded. And in the era of COVID, legislation, police reform, we're all in the same boat. And so we went to all the local leaders, local law enforcement leaders, and chief sheriffs, things like that, and what can we do? And about that same time, we were the right place at the right time and applied for federal funding through the Burn JAG grant, the Department of Justice. And surprisingly got it much quicker than we anticipated. I mean, literally, like probably months sooner than we anticipated. And before we had a chance to even get people in the seats, when I say, like, we had 4 people at the police department that were assigned to the street crimes unit that converted over into the Walla Walla Regional Drug and Gang Task Force. And that partnered with 1 deputy or detective from the sheriff's office, 1 from the College Place Police Department, and 1 from the Department of Corrections. And that's currently our staffing. A couple of those people are also called task force officers associated with Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and U.S. Marshal Service, and soon to be probably associated with HSI as well.
So you said the staffing is those 3, but there's also yourself. Who else from Walla Walla Police Department?
I have 4 detectives currently assigned.
Okay.
That were all part of the Walla Walla Regional Drug and Gang Task Force, along with the Sheriff's Office, College Place.
For City PD.
Yeah,
So you pick up the 3.
You know, as far as Tri-City, maybe don't quote this, but like get them into Dayton, Tri-Cities, out of the area. But it was just, again, it was like whack-a-mole. And we're a small, tight-knit community, so Walla Walla's problems are College Place, the counties, Dayton's, and some of Tri-Cities' problems. We were starting to see patterns of networks, and everybody in the southeastern region of Walla Walla, and as far as even Moses Lake, there's this big network. So when we switched from those individual teams to that group with one mission, we started seeing more success. And then I left that unit right as they were switching to task force, but I know to speak to the partnerships of other agencies. Before it was a task force with those other agency members a part of it, we would still, again, trying to solve the problem for the community. Gunnar and I would go to College Place or Dayton or out in the county to try to work those career criminal problems, the criminals that are victimizing the entire region, and solve that problem. But we'd run into roadblocks, or just, you know, we'd have to check in with whoever was working that day, which we'd still do anyway if we went into another jurisdiction. But it just seemed like once we had the task force with embedded people from other jurisdictions, like a lot of lines just dropped, and it made it so much easier to fluidly work as a team in the entire region and go after some serious, like, drug dealers, and just intel sharing. It just works so much better.
So we do subsequent behind-the-scene investigations on all of those that occur. So that might be an overdose from fentanyl, it could be an overdose on methamphetamine, it could be whatever the drug overdose is. We investigate those as controlled substance homicides. They are very challenging cases to work, but we do behind the scenes follow up on any fatality deaths related to fentanyl or any other drugs. And then the last thing was, people may not know, is there's a component that we do behind the scenes lobbying for funding, because the task force is funded by, he said initially it was a Burn JAG grant, which it was. Now it's shifted to the state of Washington. And so there's 15 drug gang task forces across the state. And we're all competing. And right now they've been doing kind of a fair distribution to all of them. But when they mention that, the state is facing a deficit, and we have to look at that like, is that gonna impact us locally? So fortunately, we are now in a position where the agencies fund the positions. When we started out the task force, they were receiving grant funding for their positions. So Department of Corrections was receiving a portion of it, College Place was, as well as Walla Walla County. We have now shifted towards, as of the first of the year, all of our partner agencies will be funding those positions out of their own budgets.
Okay.
But the operational budget comes from funding from the state. So that includes all of the things that it takes to operate the task force. So it could be surveillance equipment, it could be specialty gear, it could be confidential funds. So all of those things are funded through that state grant. So it's important that we continue to lobby and we continue to get funded, because we need a source of income for that, or a source of revenue for that.
Okay.
We hear back from our intel on the streets from sources that when you hit a bigger target and get more drugs at a time, things dry up a little bit. We know we're never going to stop the flow of drugs. That's just an impossibility. It's the whole supply and demand thing. It's not going to happen. So we realize that, but what can we do to make the biggest impact? And we found is the higher level we go after those DTO people, that the more of an impact long term it takes. I mean, eventually somebody will take their place. We know that, but that's our drive, is to keep going after those people. I've seen us going from getting, starting off with the fentanyl specifically. I mean, it was like a big deal to get like 10 or 20 pills, on a stop, even like 4 years ago, to now we're getting hundreds. To where we're going in search warrants, where we were getting, 10 to 100 pills, to where now we're getting pounds. We're getting pounds of pills or pounds of powder. So the amount that we're going after is definitely significantly, and it's here. Fentanyl is a scourge. It's been a scourge for roughly about 2019. It hit the valley here pretty hard. That's when I noticed overdose, and the impact was quick. It was faster than any of us anticipated.
It's the Band-Aids. And so it's just a different approach when it comes to fentanyl. I think it's similar to what we've seen in the past over years, to where we had heroin on the streets, to where we would have heroin overdoses. So people would shoot, we'd find them with the needle in an arm on the side slumped over. And, potentially fatality, we might revive them with Narcan, but we're back into that same class of drugs, where you have a high propensity of, you use, you go into respiratory failure, your body starts shutting down, and there's a risk of death. So I think we're in a highly addictive substance, which, methamphetamine, it's the high, it gives you that kick, where fentanyl is the complete opposite. It's the narcotic analgesic, and it just slows everything down, and it takes the pain away. So it's a completely different class of drugs. It has a completely different form of addiction. We're seeing a flood of the drugs on the market. Like, it's everywhere. It's very accessible.
So they cut other drugs with it too.
And absolutely, like the fentanyl powder and the fentanyl pills we've seen, it's incredible. We've seen it cut with anything from xylazine to aspirin to
Cocaine
to heroin. It's you don't know what's in it. So it's very odd. It's not like methamphetamine. You typically would see it's got methamphetamine, and that's what it is, and that's what the lab confirms that it's tested with. Well, it's not the same thing with fentanyl. So they don't know what the level of fentanyl that's in there. Does it have carfentanil? Does it have the fatal doses? Does it not? So there's a lot of inconsistencies with the drugs on the market.
For potency, it's literally 50 to 100 times more potent than heroin is.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, a small amount. They always say 1 pill can kill. That's literally true.
Mm-hmm.
There's enough. I think DEA did a study last year, and I think almost 50% of all the pills that they basically fake, like Oxycontin pills, that look like M30s, cross-tops, things like that, were in fact fentanyl. I think up to 50% of them had enough of a dose of fentanyl that could be considered a lethal dose.
Okay.
So you have literally, small amounts that can kill, and people that are used to taking, this X amount of heroin or whatever other kind of opioid, and then they use fentanyl, literally the first time user can die.
Okay.
And so that's scary. And we've seen that many times.
So it's a lot easier to overdose
Yes.
than the drugs that you've combated in the
Yeah,
past.
and
Absolutely.
I think to add to the Narcan piece, we gotta be careful about not just having Narcan be the answer, because Narcan's not working on the xylazine laced
Right.
fentanyl, and people can give Narcan all day long and they could still die because of the other stuff that's in there.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So obviously with the task force, you guys have times where you're putting a lot of effort, making progress. And then I know you have setbacks. How did the kind of pinball effect of the change of laws, so let's do this, no, now let's do this, play into that? Did that affect your guys' work? Did that affect progress that you were making when you were told you can't arrest people for, well, my understanding is you were told you can't arrest users for possessing anymore, which my understanding is not what you were going after anyway, so how did that affect you guys?
Well, it affects you from the standpoint of source information.
Okay.
A lot of we can't do drug work without people willing to give us information. We cannot do the work we can without people in the community coming forward to give us information. Sometimes people will not do that without motivation. Sometimes
Okay.
people will not do that without something, for lack of a better term, hanging over their head. And a lot of that information came from users, low-level people that were providing the information. So what we saw literally overnight is we had a lot of people willing to give us information for those reasons and others, that all of a sudden they had no reason to, because we didn't have anything in their minds, their language, anything over their head. So nothing to hold them to that. So you went overnight to having a good source, a good amount of people that were providing information to almost seemingly drying up for a period of time. That was probably one of the hardest things for us in regards to, you had COVID and then the laws changed all within about a year period of time. So that was a big pendulum swing for us.
Let's go through that timeline a little bit, because this was all happening like right before I got here and as I was transitioning from education to the crime beat. So tell me a little bit, it was the Blake decision that did that, right? So you said that was happening right after COVID hit?
Yeah, about the same time, within
Okay.
a year, I believe it was, yeah.
And then that was in effect for a year, 2 years?
2 years.
No, I felt like it was 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, it
Okay.
was 2 years, yeah.
And then the court kind of reversed it and you can arrest, it's no longer,
Yeah, it's still not a
Cited.
felony, it's a gross misdemeanor, but at least something at least.
well, it was cited and released for a while, right? Where you couldn't arrest, you could just give them
Are they
a
doing the referrals?
referral.
No, that was initially what the decision changed, was when the laws changed, it wasn't necessarily decriminalized, it was criminalized after 3 referrals. So if we caught you with heroin once, we can write a referral, caught you twice, we could write a referral, 3 times write a referral, and then we could cite you after that 3rd referral. But the referrals weren't going anywhere. There was no process in place for somebody that has the referrals. And so essentially, not only did we lose intelligence, which is obviously critical to the success of mid to upper level dealer, enforcement,
Yes.
we lost the ability for users to get mandated treatment. And I think that's the biggest component is I don't think any of us sitting at the table would say we don't want users to get treatment. Like, that's a priority. I want users to get treatment. I want dealers to be held
But
accountable.
they weren't getting treatment if they could throw away the referral.
They were not getting treatment because nothing was happening about the referrals.
Right.
And you were having, it had the appearance of, from the officer perspective, of it was a waste of time because nothing was happening with referrals. So then we have a situation of, are officers continuing to even write the referrals, or are they just taking the drugs and putting them into the evidence for destruction? And so there's that question as well. But if you think about that in the big perspective, which is right now, we don't have any inpatient treatment centers within
Mhm.
Walla Walla County. Okay,
There's
but
one opening in Tri-Cities, correct? That can help.
I've heard there's one that's opening, but remember that Tri-Cities has a demand as well.
Yeah.
And they don't have any, so they have Richland, Pasco, and Kennewick that need a treatment center. So ideally, we need a treatment center, but that put us behind in the efforts to get treatment centers because we're rolling through this referral system, coming out of COVID, and nobody's seeking treatment. Because like it or not, incarceration is a form of treatment, right? You're gonna, if you're addicted, you're gonna break the cycle from either go into prison or be held in jail for a period of time, and there's probably treatment that comes along with your sentencing when you have the drug convictions. So that kind of went away for a period of time. So now we created addiction by not having any kind of forced treatment plans. So even though we would hold users accountable back pre-Blake, we still had the ability to get them into treatment programs as part of that sentencing structure. And so that went away as well.
So the big idea that if we make this the law and stop enforcing, more people will get treatment. The opposite happened, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And you know, we attend several meetings as part of our task force, and you know, part of what we had heard, and I don't have the specific names for you, but there were treatment centers that shut down because they lost funding, because courts were paying via the state or however they got their funding sources, they were paying to get people into treatment programs during that time frame. Well, now you have less people seeking treatment, so it's a business, and some of those.
Those centers that shut down, they weren't inpatient, were they? Walla Walla never has had it.
It was never in Walla Walla, they were like in a Seattle.
Oh, gotcha,
On the-
gotcha.
Yeah, on the west side of the
Okay,
state. And,
gotcha.
yeah, we have never had an inpatient treatment center since I've worked here, and I've been here almost 23 years. So I
Okay.
can't speak about pre-time, but,
No.
yeah, we certainly have not seen one. And it,
In the line of frustration that I think we've seen as the drug enforcement aspect of things is that there is, you mentioned earlier that it wasn't looked at as being a violent crime for the sake of sentencing or even holding people in jail. And that's a big frustration, as the captain mentioned earlier, is that we're seeing people dying from fentanyl use. So if you have a fentanyl dealer that you know is dealing fentanyl, and he's dealing thousands of doses of fentanyl perpetually, over and over again. So every time that he's on the street, that he's not in jail or not being held accountable or in prison for doing that, he's potentially serving slices of death, basically, to the community. And until we, the legal system, people in general, can look at it from that standpoint, it's just drugs, or it's just them, or it's just them. It's affected us personally. I mean, everybody in this table can talk about something or somebody that's affected you personally. And it's troubling when you see people that have been responsible for the death of people that are still free and not being held accountable. So I think that we as a society, when we start holding drug dealers more accountable, we're going to see a greater impact. You're never going to stop a flow of drugs. It's still going to happen, but I think you're going to have people that are, if you're looking at, instead of just getting a slap on the hand and, you know, maybe doing jail time for days instead of months or years, or even prison time, they're going to be more likely to do what they're going to be doing versus if they're looking at, you know, mandatory minimums of 5-10 years, like the federal system has for that. It's another reason why we try to have, if we can take a local charge to the federal level, we will do it almost always for that reason, because they have mandatory minimums.
That harsher.
If you're just, and we try to do that as often as we possibly can. But we're seeing repeat offenders over and over again. So our hope is that, you know, our judges get tired of seeing the same people over and over again and start holding them accountable as well. I know that there are certain guidelines they have, but I think that there are also ways of being able to navigate the system to hold people better accountable, that we're hoping happens in the near future, because that's a piece of the pie for us. Because we can be putting these people in jail, we can make good cases, and we present the prosecutor's office, prosecutor goes to, you know, before a judge and things like that, and it goes to the courts. That if everybody's not doing their job in that system, including judicial system, we're gonna be missing a giant piece of the pie. And so that's a big issue for us moving forward, is that I don't know, through education, whatever, but that's something we would love to see change.
Okay.
I think I'll just echo what he's saying, which is, we all want users to get healthy. We want them to get treatment. We want them to be successful, but we also expect the dealers to be held accountable. And, we work very hard on taking out mid to upper level drug dealers, and we have had some great success. And we have seen those mid to upper level drug dealers released and back on the streets. And I'll even go as far as saying we have even seen a mid to upper level drug dealer be released on house arrest and continue to deal after being released on house arrest. We have rearrested some of these mid to upper level drug dealers multiple times. They have been rearrested while being out on probation and for mid to upper level drug dealing again. So again, it's important that we at some point recognize that this is a violent offense. It is. They are dealing a drug that is potentially killing people. And what's worse is they don't even know what they're dealing. They don't know, am I dealing a fatal dose now, or is this potentially a good dose? They don't know. And so they know after it's killing people, because you've seen it in the media, you see it on social media where we have a hot batch that came through. So all these public warnings go out. That's that person, mid to upper level dealer that we typically hold accountable, and we're seeing them back out on the streets. So either legislatively it needs to be fixed, or locally it needs to be dealt with a different set of eyes and a different opinion. But I know that the prosecutors made the argument. I know that the courts have their belief as to which side that argument falls on, but we work diligently to hold these people accountable, and sometimes that bar falls short.
Well, when I did the story on pretrial release, and when I won't say came at the judges, but I brought your guys' Acosta's concerns with the judges, with one judge and one future judge, they pulled out what they can legally consider violent crimes, because it's actually spelled out by the legislator what they can consider legal crimes and what they can't. And they also had frustration, the judge wasn't on there, but said that, they go by what they're told to by the lawmakers. What needs, like I said, setting up a question that can't really be answered here, but what needs to be changed? Is there a way to work within the law as it is, or does the change have to come from a new law? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Well, I think there's an easy fix, which is some sort of legislative definition. If the local courts are concerned about their opinion as to where that violent crime falls, legislatively, you could very easily plug the gap by saying violent crimes include dealing of fentanyl, and problem solved. So there's no guesswork from the local courts. There's no guesswork anywhere. It's legislatively put into place, and I think that fix would make a huge difference.
Perfect. One things that I was going to ask about that I forgot to include on the list was dosage sentences, and whether or not they're more helpful or hurtful in the problem. And I know you're talking about stronger sentences, but I think you're talking about that for the dealers in the mid and upper level. Didn't it sound like you were talking about that for the users? Are dosage sentences, is there such a thing as a dosage success story? Because what I see is Skylar Glasby get dosage sentence and then be back the day he gets out on good behavior, get arrested again for.
Are you talking DOSA or drug court?
Yeah.
We had some successes in drug court.
Okay.
There's a few, just those sentence alternatives, whether it's drug court or DOSA, I've seen a few.
Okay.
And I'm not against trying for anybody who would be a good candidate for that, but at some point you gotta look at someone's history and take in some common sense of, is this person a good candidate for one of those sentencing alternatives? And
So the problem might be lying more in the selection of people they put through it rather than the system itself?
I can say that, like the prosecutor's office ask for our input on
Mhm.
most situations. Is this person a good candidate for, like ARC?
Yeah.
Or DOSA?
Okay.
And both of those have elements if they plead guilty to the, as charged, and they don't go through with the requirements of that appropriate system, that then they serve the time above and beyond that. But we haven't seen that really upheld a lot.
Yeah.
It's like they get multiple chances.
They make the threat, but never
Yeah.
the threat. The judge or the court will say, you know, if you mess up, we're gonna put you back, and then they come back and give you one more chance or another chance, and just over and over again. And I mean, we've arrested people on warrants that it appeared that they were gonna be going back to prison because they didn't fulfill their end of the treatment or the sentencing, and were dumbfounded to find out they were not sent to prison or not held accountable. It goes back to the accountability piece. They just,
Okay, that makes sense.
even if they'll throw something out on the table that says, here is your consequence, but it just seems like it's never followed through, or rarely. More often than not, it just, I don't know why.
There needs to be a person or entity that, when people don't follow through with the things that they're supposed to be following through with, that are held accountable, and we just don't see that. I don't know if it's judicial level or prosecutor level, I don't know. We don't know what that is, but we see the revolving door a lot.
And I support DOSA, I support alternative sentences for drug users,
Yes,
Yeah.
for addiction. I
Yeah.
don't support those for the dealers.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't make sense. Like, do they do those stuff for dealers?
That's
We've
unfortunately,
seen
that's-
arguments come through the court often,
Yes.
Okay.
and so, I mean, you can establish your own opinion on those, I'm sure.
You just spoke of a name that.
Yeah.
And he's out, he's getting out again.
Well, he still has to go back to Oregon, doesn't he?
I'm not
Yes,
sure.
yeah.
We just got a notice of release that
Oh.
getting out, and very soon.
Oh. I thought when he served his sentence, talking about Skylar Glasser, I think. Okay.
Pattern, or personality. And then, what are your natural highs? What makes you feel really good inside? Do you play sports? Do you, what is that? Something other than drugs to teach them about themselves, and what other ways are, to cope with things in life. And then once they hit that middle school age, then you start talking about the drug stuff, and it all intertwines together. Anyway, there's a lot of really good stuff out there coming up. So our goal is to get, and we're getting there, partnering with the schools, getting into the schools and getting that message out there. I'll say we're on a comeback from where we were as far as not having, it went from the whole scare tactics thing, and then there was the anti-police movement tied into it big time, where they didn't want police in the school. So we're coming back from that. We're slowly starting to work back in and get that message out there.
Okay. So you felt that here locally in Walla Walla, of not wanting police in the schools too?
Yes.
From families or from the districts themselves?
Well, we got hit with, and again, I keep going back to COVID, and I apologize for jumping on you, but we had some really good successful programs at work that just died off because of COVID. One was, we had a school lunch program, so we would actually go into the schools, just randomly. We might go to Prospect Point, or back then Blue Ridge, and we would just pop in and have lunch. And so it was just having the FaceTime with the students in the school.
Harder to do that when they're learning from home.
Well, and it was hard to do that, but there are also restrictions that wouldn't allow us to do that.
Yeah.
So we were not allowed to go into the schools to do that. So you had home learning, and then you had some very tight restrictions, and then that went away. So that's opened back up to us. So there's been several times when we've gotten positive feedback from the schools saying, hey, we really appreciate the officer coming out today and walking through the hallways. So we may just go randomly out to Garrison and just walk around and greet people.
And I do get, there's several of the schools that have reached out and opened the invitation to go have lunch again. I think the problem or the struggle now is our call volume since COVID has just skyrocketed with just calls for service, mental health, whatever, homelessness.
And the complexity of the calls in general.
Yeah, and we don't have any more officers than we did back then, and so they're once again being asked to do a lot more with either the same amount or less sometimes, so finding the time for the patrol officers to get in there and go do those things is difficult too, and that's just, I mean, that's not the school's fault or anything, but.
It's not the lack of desire.
Yeah.
Officers want to do that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll reach out to Nikki today and try to set up an interview with her. I'll
Okay.
also reach out.
Realizing just have enough resources. So the leadership in the region was all very, very supportive in regards to moving forward with this. Chief Tamaris, Sheriff Kreider, we even went to Columbia County as well and State Patrol. Initially, we were hoping to partner with them, but over the course of time, I realized that they were not going to be able to partner with us. But long term, we would like to also do that, to include State Patrol and the Columbia County, because I think that would, not just resource-wise, but also it gives different perspectives in regards to what people do within the task force and availability of those resources.
Columbia County needs the help.
They do, because they're kind of in no man's land. Like Walla Walla County for years.
Yeah.
This is the very first time that we've had any kind of sustained outside source funding for doing a multi-jurisdictional task force. It's all been internally, city, county, and things like that. That's just been, city, county funds and maybe seizures moving forward. But this is the first time, the last 3 years, that we've been able to have a sustained source of funding. So that's why the biggest change for us has been that way. And like Captain said, is that initially, most of that funding was going toward backfilling personnel, but now moving forward is not. It's actually going forward to funding, equipment, confidential funds, training, things like that. So we didn't have that sustained moving forward. Now we do. So now we've got some great people in the room here that I love to talk to.
Do you want me to put them in a new spot so it doesn't look weird?
Made it a mandatory as fentanyl to be, I believe it's July of 2025, where all canines are to be certified on fentanyl as a requirement. With our training group, she was trained and imprinted and certified on fentanyl, and we've been working on it ever since. So pretty excited.
When did that? Is she already out detecting fentanyl, or is that something looking forward to?
Yeah, so we've had a couple seizures. I'm trying to remember if there was fentanyl or not. But I would say most narcotic dealings that we're dealing with, they're poly users, where fentanyl is just as involved as methamphetamine and cocaine, and we're usually seeing all three together pretty regularly. So it's kind of hard to say specifically, if she's targeted it, but.
Did she have to be taken off of service for any time to train for that, or?
Nope. So we have specific training days that we dedicate the work towards that, and we did that directly for fentanyl to imprint that. And it's a process, just kind of it's giving her a new process to work with and to kind of understand what she's supposed to be targeting as well. So.
The dog might alert on the car, which might lead to a temporary seizure with a search warrant, and then we go in and we find quantities of fentanyl pills, fentanyl powder, whatever it is. And so that's drugs that we were not able to take off the street because we didn't essentially have a source for it to begin with.
Perfect. I think that